when users are given the right to own their identity, I don't think they'll ever give it back to developers.
This is Wilson Wei. He's a 28-year-old Web3 serial entrepreneur who's looking to transform social media as we know it today. So how would it look like and why should you care?
US officials have repeatedly voiced concern over this
Literally,
app.
when TikTok becomes more successful, TikTokers become less successful.
And that's just the sheep's clothing. As you walk through, it is a sophisticated tool for harvesting this data.
Well, it turns out there might be a solution to all of this, and Wilson is working on it.
The way that you're interacting with TikTok right now is like, you're the tenants, you're renting their service, and you're trying to generate money based on the land that they provide you. But you have no ownership. And therefore, if they want to enforce a 50% cut or even an 80% cut, but if you own this profile, you own the identity, you own the social graph data, you own the content, that would change the game. You have much more bargaining power.
Yeah. This bloke won't haggle. Won't haggle?
It would make you easier to migrate to any other platforms. And also your monetization will be much more flexible. It really becomes your asset instead of like a renting service.
So how would that work?
Here's the part when a decentralized technology could kick in and provide a user-owned version of social graph. And that's why we're building CyberConnect. The good side about it is, like, for example, you're entitled to all the data, all the followers that you have, and it's interoperable. If you're trying to create another new channel on any new platforms that's integrated with CyberConnect as well, you could just migrate your existing followers to there, so you have millions of followers on that account as well.
Yeah, how cool.
Because everything is linked to your address. That could create what we call the mobility of your social capital, which is pretty important.
Sounds super exciting, but one of the first things that came up on my mind with these decentralized platforms that pride themselves in censorship resistance, doesn't it come with a lot of risk? Like, who will be monitoring, preventing any harassment or inappropriate content on these new platforms? So who's responsible?
Creating a dApp doesn't really mean that you don't have censorship at all. What kind of content does an application want to show to their users is actually still in the hands of this developer, and they could enforce any kind of community rules, any censorship policy that they would like to adopt. That whether users are allowed to post those things, it's like whether this application would allow users to read those content.
The answer, as it turns out, isn't as complex and completely in the hands of the next generation of social apps. At the end of the day, it's fully up to the platform to set these parameters, and what if you don't agree? Well, you're free to go to any other platform that fits your preferences without having to leave your followers or content behind. And that is exactly the beauty of the next generation of social. You're no longer glued to any of these platforms, which really puts back the power in the hands of the user. Another aspect which makes social media platforms like TikTok or YouTube so addictive is the algorithm, which will feed you with the best suited content based on your interest graph, to the degree that it even gets scary sometimes. But just like you can decentralize your social graph, you can also decentralize your interest graph.
The interest graph data, we're aggregating users on-chain and off-chain activities data. For example, the assets that you own, whether you guys hold the same NFT or DAO token, your action on proposal voting, your connection existed on Twitter accounts. Those kind of data could be added up together into making a very powerful recommendation.
So are we even ready yet for the big migration to the next era of social apps?
I think it's definitely not ready for billions of users. And I think it's mainly because of the infrastructure is not ready. For example, the process of creating a wallet, it's still very complicated. And most importantly, even after, if you want to do any transactions on chain, it's still pretty slow and sometimes costly as well. But I'll say that's also what I believe the biggest bottleneck here for us to gain more adoption.
While we aren't ready yet to onboard billions of users, there's a lot of experimenting already going on. And in the meantime, there's a lot of stuff you guys can already check out, like link3.to by CyberConnect. And as Wilson says,
I do believe that that's the trend moving forward. Because when users are given the right to own their identity, I don't think they'll ever give it back to developers, you know.
Now, what do you think? If you enjoyed this, make sure to check out our other video in which Wilson shares his most valuable lessons learned as a Web3 serial entrepreneur. I highly recommend it, but I also might be biased.
Yeah,